In this lecture, we're going to be looking primarily at what are some genetic things that we all have in common and looking at some other factors other than just your genes that can determine what traits you have. Okay, so hopefully, as you are all now very well aware, um, what determines what traits we get, what determines what color eyes we have, and what shape our nose is, and what our blood type is, and all that stuff. This is all from our DNA, right? And the genes, and genes are just little segments on the DNA that codes for a particular protein, typically. So all the info comes from our chromosomes. That comes from our DNA, right? So this should not be new or shattering information to you. Um, but one thing that is kind of interesting is that this is true for humans. It's true for lizards. It's true for sharks. It's true for, I don't know, owls. It's true for roses and ferns and moss and bacteria. And so this genetic code, the fact that like every single living thing has DNA, and also every single living thing has RNA, that all living things on the planet right now have those things is really, really amazing. Okay. Um, so this is a really important fundamental like thing of biology, that all living things share the same genetic code. Okay. In addition to all living things using DNA and or RNA for our genetic code, there's some other things that we have in common. Um, Processes and pathways like cellular respiration or glycolysis. We see that widespread. It's not just humans. It's like across the board. All living things can do cellular respiration and or glycolysis. All of them. That's what everybody does for their energy. All living things have ribosomes, right? Both prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So every single living thing on Earth has ribosomes. Um, If you remember back to learning about the organelles, you remember that the mitochondria has its own DNA and the chloroplast has its own DNA. Can you remember why? Remember, because the mitochondria and the chloroplast probably used to be standalone prokaryotes, right? Okay, so they all have their own DNA. But there's something really, really interesting about that DNA in the mitochondria and in the chloroplasts. All right. So, as it turns out, this DNA in the mitochondria, we all get that from our moms. Everyone gets their mitochondria DNA from their moms. So everyone gets their mitochondria from their moms, maternally inherited, which means you can literally trace like genealogy and maternal ancestry through looking at mitochondrias, which is kind of nuts. Okay, and this is true for humans and pandas and frogs and fish and everything. We all get our mitochondria from the egg. We don't get it in the sperm. Similarly, in plants, they get their mitochondrial DNA from the plant version of an egg, which is an ovule, and they also get their chloroplast DNA, again from the ovule. So you can look at plant lineage, which seems kind of like, why would you look at a plant tree, but like a family tree, but you could figure out the family tree of a plant, and you could trace it through looking at the chloroplast DNA or the mitochondrial DNA, which is kind of neat. Okay. So we all have some same metabolic pathways. We all use DNA and RNA. We all have ribosomes. We all get our mitochondrial DNA from our moms. And if you're a plant, you get your chloroplast DNA from your moms as well, too. Okay. All right. Just a quick circle back. This was part of your assignment before. We've got some things. So those are some things that we have in common, but what are some things that help make us be different and not just clones? Okay. This is the family that was on this like TV show, Cheaper by the Dozen. And obviously they have a lot of kids, but notice how all their kids, here's the mom and the dad in the middle. These are all of their children. Like notice how their children are not carbon copies, right? So what allows those kids to be different? And again, we've already learned these, so I'm going to just quickly just run through them. One would be Mendel's law of segregation, which says that each gamete carries only one allele. You can get a big R from dad, but you're not going to get two big R's from dad. Okay, so each parent is going to give you one allele in their gamete during meiosis. Okay. which is going to make the gametes that are produced in meiosis different, right? You might get a big R gamete or little R gamete. And that would change possibly your genotype and phenotype, right? The other thing is the law of independent assortment that's saying depending on how the chromosomes line up will give you different possible gametes that are formed. Okay. We also have learned about crossing over and how crossing over, right? Here's crossing over. We get 4 different cells. Without crossing over, you get 2 identical cells and 2 identical cells. So that helps things be varied. And also just random fertilization. We know that basically every single sperm is unique. Every single egg is unique. So you take a unique egg, unique sperm, boom, look at you. You're like 1 in a trillion or something. Okay. So again, that's just kind of a little repeat. So we know what we all have been similar. We know what makes us different. Okay. And so we think about things like, oh, do the Punnett square. You can be big A, or little a, and that's what makes my phenotype. Usually. But on top of that, sometimes it's more than just the genotype that can determine the traits of an organism. So here are some neat examples. For some flowers, these are hydrangeas. They grow here in Wisconsin. Their flower type isn't always determined by the genotype. It's determined by the pH of the soil. If the soil is acidic, some hydrangeas are going to be more pink in color. If the soil is, acidic would be down here. Hi. It's been a couple years since I've taught chemistry. Yikes. Okay. If the soil is more acidic, they're going to be blue in color. And if the soil is more, as it gets more and more neutral, it's going to get up to the purple and pink range. Okay. So you could have the same hydrangea plant, but planted in different soil mixes, and they could give you different flower colors. Cool. There are some animals where their fur color changes depending on the seasons. This is typically happens in like the Arctic, where in the summer things are like more brown and green, and in the winter things are white. Okay. So here's the same Arctic bird in the winter and the summer. Here's the same Arctic hare in the winter and the summer. This is an ermine, a little rodent in the winter and the summer, and then a fox. Okay. And basically, when the shifting temperatures and the daylight hours change, this triggers like a hormonal reaction, which causes the fur color change. And then it changes back when the seasons change again. Kind of cool. The last neat example of this is reptiles, and the temperature that the reptile like eggs are at when they're incubating will possibly determine the this like sex or gender of the reptile. Okay, so like with alligators, if the eggs are in a cold environment or a hot environment, that's going to lead to females. Temps in the middle, males. For some turtles, cold nests are going to be males and warm are going to be females. And then in this lizard, a skink, low temps are going to be, so this is weird. So XX is typically female, but if an XX egg is at a low temp, then phenotypically it's going to be male. What? Yes. Genetically, we'd say female, but phenotypically it's going to be male, which is pretty cool. And how this works is kind of complicated, as one might imagine. But I guess the kicker here is males can be XX or XY, depending on the temperature. So the main idea, you don't have to like memorize that, but the main idea is there are other things that can be at play to determine phenotype other than just the genes, right? You can have some pH, maybe some temperature or daylight hours, and more temperature. Okay. So our highlights would be, what things do we have in common? What things show common inheritance? What things do all living things have in common? What things help make us different? And what are some external factors that can determine a phenotype? And here's where we are in the textbook. It's a little bit scattered, but there you go.